3 weeks before the election, Marcus Brennan disappeared from public life. Not physically, he was still alive, still at home, still breathing. But politically, he vanished. The man who had been Victor Hale's fiercest rival, who had commanded massive rallies and dominated debate stages, suddenly withdrew from the presidential race. No dramatic press conference, no emotional farewell speech, just a brief, clinical statement released at 11:43 p.m. on a Tuesday. For personal reasons, I am suspending my campaign effective immediately. The nation woke up to chaos. Political analysts scrambled for explanations. Conspiracy theories flooded social media within minutes. Opposition supporters felt betrayed and confused. And Victor Hale? He said nothing for 18 hours. When he finally spoke, his words were carefully measured. I respect Marcus Brennan's decision and wish him well. But what really happened? Now, we're about to uncover the story behind the most mysterious political withdrawal in modern history. The rivalry that defined an era. To understand the shock of Brennan's withdrawal, you need to understand the rivalry itself. Marcus Brennan wasn't just another opponent, he was Victor Hale's perfect foil. Where Victor was bombastic and unpredictable, Marcus was calm and methodical. Where Victor dominated through personality, Marcus relied on policy expertise. Where Victor thrived in chaos, Marcus projected stability. The media loved the contrast. Every debate between them became appointment television. Their polling numbers stayed within 3 points of each other for 8 consecutive months. Victor hated it, not the competition itself. He thrived on that. What he hated was the narrative that Marcus was his intellectual superior. That Marcus was more presidential. That Marcus represented a return to dignity and competence. Those narratives aided Victor in ways few people understood. Every positive profile of Marcus felt like a personal attack on Victor's legitimacy. In the final weeks before Brennan's withdrawal, something shifted in Victor's approach. His attacks became more personal, his language more aggressive, his focus more singular. It was as if Marcus Brennan had become more than an opponent, he'd become an obsession. But then came the meeting that changed everything. 2 days before the withdrawal, on Sunday evening, 48 hours before Marcus Brennan would shock the world, something highly unusual occurred. Victor Hale's schedule showed a 3-hour block marked simply as private meeting. No location, no attendees listed, no staff members present. Multiple sources have since confirmed that Victor met with Marcus Brennan that night. Face to face, no cameras, no recordings, no witnesses beyond the two men themselves. The meeting took place at a neutral location, a private estate owned by a mutual acquaintance from the business world, someone with no political allegiances. Security details for both men maintained a perimeter but never entered the building. The estate's staff was given the evening off. Every precaution was taken to ensure absolute privacy. What was discussed in those 3 hours? Neither man has ever publicly disclosed the full conversation. But fragments have emerged over time from sources close to both camps, speaking on deep background. And those fragments paint a disturbing picture. According to these sources, Victor didn't come to negotiate. He came to win, and his weapons weren't policy positions or debate tactics, they were far more personal. The leverage. Here's what we know, pieced together from multiple independent sources. Victor's team had spent months conducting opposition research on Marcus Brennan. Not the typical political variety, digging into voting records or business dealings, but something deeper and more invasive. They'd investigated Marcus's personal life with extraordinary thoroughness. His finances, his relationships, his family, his past. And they'd found something Marcus had kept private. Something that, if exposed, would destroy not just his campaign but his entire public reputation. The exact nature of this information remains unclear. Those sources who know refuse to specify, citing ethical concerns and legal boundaries. But they all agree on this. It was real, it was verifiable, and it was devastating. Victor presented this information during their private meeting. Not as a threat, sources say, but as a fact. He laid out exactly what he knew. He showed Marcus the documentation. And then he explained the choice Marcus faced. Option 1. Continue the campaign. Victor would release the information strategically, through media channels that would give it maximum impact. Marcus would be destroyed publicly. His family would be dragged through the scandal. His legacy would be permanently tarnished. And he would still lose the election because voters would abandon him immediately. Option 2. Withdraw from the race. cite personal reasons, preserve his dignity, protect his family. The information would never become public. Victor would even speak respectfully about Marcus's decision. The story would fade quickly. Marcus could rebuild his life quietly, away from politics. Imagine sitting across from your greatest rival, watching him lay out your worst nightmare with clinical precision. Imagine realizing he has the power to destroy everything you've built. Imagine understanding that the choice isn't whether you'll lose, it's only how much you'll lose. Marcus asked for time to consider. Victor gave him 24 hours. The decision Marcus Brennan spent Monday in seclusion. He met with his wife, his closest advisors, and his attorney. The conversations were agonizing. Some urged him to fight, to expose Victor's tactics as blackmail, to turn the scandal into a referendum on Victor's character rather than his own past. But Marcus understood the reality. Political scandals don't work that way. The public might eventually sympathize with him, but only after his reputation was already destroyed. The news cycle would focus on the scandal itself, not the ethics of how it was obtained. His family would suffer regardless. And Victor would still win, both the scandal war and the election. On Monday evening, Marcus called Victor directly. The conversation lasted 7 minutes. Marcus agreed to withdraw. Victor agreed to bury the information permanently. On Tuesday at 11:43 p.m., the statement went public. By Wednesday morning, Marcus Brennan's presidential campaign was history. The public reaction. The nation erupted in confusion and speculation. Why would a candidate leading in several key states suddenly quit 3 weeks before the election? The personal reasons explanation satisfied no one. Conspiracy theories multiplied by the hour. Some claimed Marcus had received devastating health news. Others suggested financial scandals were about to break. A few speculated about family crises or hidden affairs. The theories grew increasingly wild. Blackmail, threats, secret deals, foreign interference. The media investigated aggressively. Reporters contacted everyone in Marcus's circle. They analyzed his recent behavior for clues. They combed through his financial records and schedule. But they found nothing concrete. Marcus had covered his tracks carefully, and Victor's team had been even more careful. Marcus himself gave one brief interview, 3 days after his withdrawal. He looked tired but composed. He repeated the personal reasons explanation. He refused to elaborate. He expressed no bitterness toward Victor Hale. When pressed about rumors of a private meeting, he simply said, "I've had many meetings with many people." That's what campaigns involve. The investigation eventually stalled. Without evidence, the story began to fade. Other scandals and controversies filled the news cycle. Life moved on. Victor's victory. Victor Hale won the election in a landslide. Without Marcus Brennan in the race, the opposition fractured. Secondary candidates lacked the profile and resources to mount effective campaigns. Victor's path to power became inevitable. In his victory speech, Victor mentioned Marcus Brennan briefly. "I want to acknowledge my former opponent, Marcus Brennan, who conducted himself with dignity throughout this campaign. I wish him well in his future endeavors." The words sounded magnanimous. The audience applauded. No one except Victor and Marcus understood the dark irony embedded in that tribute. Behind the scenes, Victor was euphoric. Not just because he'd won the election, that had always been likely, but because he'd neutralized his greatest threat without public controversy. He'd eliminated Marcus Brennan as a political force without making him a martyr. He'd demonstrated power while maintaining plausible deniability. It was, in Victor's mind, the perfect political execution. The aftermath. The story doesn't end with Victor's victory. The consequences of that Sunday evening meeting continued to ripple through the political landscape for years. Victor's inner circle experienced unusual turnover. 3 senior advisors resigned within 6 months, citing vague disagreements. Over the following years, other loyalists gradually distanced themselves. Some cited exhaustion, others mentioned family commitments. But those who knew the real story understood. They couldn't reconcile what they'd witnessed. One former advisor, speaking years later anonymously, described it this way: "We all knew Victor played hardball. But there's a difference between aggressive politics and destroying someone's life over information that had nothing to do with their qualifications for office." Some of us realized we'd crossed a line we couldn't uncross. Marcus Brennan built a quiet life away from politics. He joined a prestigious consulting firm, focusing on international business development. He rarely gave interviews. He never wrote the tell-all book that publishers offered him lucrative deals to produce. He attended his children's school events, traveled with his wife, and cultivated a reputation for discretion and integrity. But those who worked with him noticed something. Marcus had become intensely private, almost paranoid about information security. He never discussed his political past. He refused to attend events where Victor Hale might be present. And he structured his business dealings with unusual levels of legal protection. A former colleague observed, "It was like watching someone who'd survived a traumatic experience." Marcus functioned perfectly well on the surface, but there was always this guardedness, this awareness that vulnerability could be weaponized. The pattern. What made the Marcus Brennan situation particularly significant wasn't just the individual incident. It was the pattern it revealed about Victor Hale's approach to power. Over his years in office, similar stories emerged with disturbing regularity. Critics who seemed poised to cause Victor serious problems would suddenly back down. Business competitors would unexpectedly settle lawsuits on favorable terms. Media figures preparing critical investigations would abruptly shift to other topics. None of these incidents alone proved anything. Each had plausible alternative explanations. But collectively, they suggested a systematic approach. Identify threats early, gather information aggressively, and neutralize opposition through leverage rather than public confrontation. The legacy. Today, the Marcus Brennan incident exists in a strange liminal space, widely suspected, never proven, endlessly analyzed by political insiders but barely known to the general public. Victor Hale's presidency continues to be debated. His supporters celebrate his accomplishments and his willingness to fight. His critics condemn his methods and his disregard for traditional norms. The truth about how he eliminated his most dangerous opponent remains buried beneath layers of deniability and calculated silence. Marcus Brennan lives quietly, successfully, privately. He has rebuilt a good life. But those who knew him before and after say something was permanently lost that Sunday evening when he sat across from Victor Hale and realized he had no choice but to surrender. And somewhere in the archives of Victor Hale's operation, perhaps in a secured file or encrypted database, the information that destroyed Marcus Brennan's political career still exists. A reminder that some victories are won not on debate stages or in voting booths, but in private rooms where leverage and fear determine outcomes. The opponent who vanished didn't just lose an election. He was erased from political history by a calculated act of private coercion. And the system that should have prevented or exposed such tactics instead enabled and protected them.